All right, so the audio might not be amazing on this, but I got it to work. So here is recorded afterward the lecture from Monday for intro. So we started out kind of checking in, going over the services that are available, seeing how everyone was feeling. Obviously, we don't need to do that through this recording, but I will let you know that I'll now be closing the door at the start of class, and part of that is a safety measure. If you're late, just knock. I know what you look like. If you're in the class, I'll let you in. This week, I'll be recording all lectures, and posting kind of a link on D2L. I'll probably upload this to YouTube or something like that. I can't upload a video over 1 gig on D2L because, of course, I can't. There'll be no in-class writings. That's part of excusing all absences this week. And the quiz will remain open an additional week. I'd recommend not putting it off an additional week because you will then have a week where you have 2 quizzes due, but I just wanted to give you some extra time because I know there are people dealing with things who are not going to be able to maybe get the quiz done this week. So, with these recordings, at least today, I'm not going to open up the videos. The PowerPoints are still posted on D2L. Please watch the videos that are embedded in the PowerPoint. The reason I'm not pulling them up is partially because of time. Hopefully, I will be recording these live on Wednesday and Friday, and I will open videos for that. Alright, so the big idea this week is that race is socially constructed but real in its consequences. And this is really how sociologists look at race. We say, alright, race, there's not really any kind of real basis to it. There's no reality to race, but that doesn't mean that, race is meaningless. So, for instance, I guess we would say really like there's a human race. There's no such thing really as race, but we've divided people up and we have put labels on different groups, and that's real. So to say, oh, we're all just human is dismissive of the real differences that exist because of society, if that makes sense. So what we mean by race is socially constructed is really what today's lecture is all about. So, race is a social construct. There's no biological basis to race. There's no traits or genes exclusive to any human group, right? So, skin color, obviously, there's a genetic basis to skin color, but when do we assign a certain skin color to be black? And when do we consider it to be, Latino or Asian Indian, right? Or American Indian, right? So all of which could have similar skin tones but be considered very differently, right? And you'll see, right, that groups have been categorized differently across time and space. So you might be labeled one race if you were living in America in 1860, and a different race if you're living in America today. You didn't change. Your physical appearance is the same. Your genetic ancestry is the same. And yet how you have been labeled is different. Okay? And in the same way that if you have people who live in Brazil or somewhere else, and they identify or they kind of consider their race one way, and they come to the United States and find it's different, okay? These pictures over here are of, both of these are twins, right? They're full siblings. And they look very different, right? One twin appears to be white, the other twin appears to not be white. And they have the same ancestry. So what does that mean about race that we would categorize one differently than the other? But also I would say there's as much variation within groups as between groups. And what we mean is take something like Asian, right? We have this idea of what Asian means in our society, but there's a huge difference, right? Between being Chinese and being like from Bangladesh, right? South Asian versus East Asian. We categorize them the same way, and there's a lot of genetic variation, right, within these groups. There's more genetic variation in the continent of Africa than like the whole world. So that's what we mean by that. Again, please watch the video. It will help clarify things. The census is something we take every 10 years, right? And it's designed for resource allocation and political representation. And there's been some question related to race the entire time we've had the census. In looking at the categories, it reveals how much our racial categories have changed across time, and that these racial categories were based on what we viewed as important and meaningful at that time. So in 1790, we see they're basically free whites, all other free persons, and slaves. Those were the categories. In 1860, there's white, black, mulatto, black slaves, mulatto slaves, and Indians. So suddenly, whether or not someone is mixed race is very important. They want to know. And of course, there's the slave versus free thing that is very meaningful. In 1890, you see white, black, mulatto, quadroon, octoroon, Indian, Chinese, and Japanese. So suddenly you have enough people of East Asian descent that it's considered important to record them. And with the quadroon and octoroon, that's very interesting, right? You've got, do you have, with quadroon, one grandparent who's black? With octoroon, do you have one great-grandparent who's black? Now, we don't have specific terms for people like that anymore, right? There's still people out there who have one grandparent or one great-grandparent who's black and the rest are white. And yet, we would label them probably as black or white based on their appearance, right? Or something else, right? We wouldn't say, oh, yes, I'm quadroon, or anything like that. That it just isn't meaningful anymore. In 1920, you had white, black, mulatto, Indian, Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Korean, Hindu, and other. Hindu is a really interesting category because, of course, we would view Hindu as a religion, right? You can be Indian and not be Hindu, a large Muslim population in India, and yet that was how Asian Indians were labeled in the census in 1920. 1950 of white, Negro, American Indian, Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, and other. In 2010, you've got all these different categories, and of course, by the 2000 census, since then, you've been able to select multiple boxes. So if you're a mixed race, instead of selecting a box that says I'm mixed race, which of course doesn't give you a lot of information because you can be mixed all sorts of different races. You can be black and Asian, you can be Asian and white, you can be black and white, you could do, there's a lot of different options. So you can select now multiple boxes. What's interesting that's missing here, right, from these racial categories is Hispanic or Latino. That's because it is a separate question. As you can see in the picture, you start out with, are you of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? And they get into a little bit of detail about that. And then you add your race. So, I don't want to do anything like that. Okay, sorry, a thing came up. So that's a separate question. When you look at race around the world, you can see that racial categories also vary. And I chose this picture because this person is from China. And if you were to ask, what area of the world do you think this person is from, most people would not assume that. And that's because we think of China as being relatively homogenous racially, but actually there are 56 racial and ethnic groups. This person would be Uyghur, which is a ethnic minority in China, and they are they historically are Muslim, right? So, this isn't a racial or ethnic category that we would think about, but exists. In Brazil, there are hundreds of racial categories, and it would depend on your skin color, in some cases your social class. And so you can easily imagine a family in Brazil where all the different family members, even though they're all related, maybe all the different siblings identify as different racial categories based on their skin tone or other things. And in South Africa, there are 4 major racial or ethnic groups. If anybody watches The Daily Show or knows anything about Trevor Noah, he writes in his autobiography about race in South Africa. The 4 major groups there being Black African, colored, Indian, and white. And these categories were created partially during apartheid, and